Cool. All right. Well, like I said, the agenda is in the invite if people want to sign in. Ware added a few things in there to the agenda. If anybody else has anything else they want to talk about today, feel free to add to that agenda. So getting into it, the action items from last time. We had a PR for changing incremental to counter, which I believe that we merged. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Ware or Mike. I think we did change that, right? I believe we did.
Yeah,
I think you did.
Yeah,
you did it like right after.
Yeah.
And requests for feedback on the alert policy. We have been going back and forth on that. There's been a lot of good dialogue, a lot of awesome dialogue. So we've been doing that. And to continue that, we have the alert proposal that I think where you put some finishing touches on that. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so together with Mike, we worked this week on trying to simplify the current proposal because it was a bit, we thought it would be better to simplify it and only cover one use case at the moment of burn rates, and then iterate on it after this proposal is merged, and then just build up and add more use cases. But beware of the opinion that like defining SLOs for burn rates would be, and have alerting on it would be the most common thing we would like to alert on, and that we thought it was a good base to start on. I mean, we know it's not covering everything, but I think it's a good thing to get the first alerting proposal or the proposal merged, and then we can build on it and make it better instead of we trying to define like the perfect straight away. So that's the thing. I didn't update the ticket description, but basically we removed any custom things. We removed the things where you could like parameterize your notification targets. It's just a name, and then the system that will read your OpenSLO files has to be aware of it and handle it accordingly. But you would have this metadata field that you can use to store anything you would like any extra fields or things like that. So we think that would cover the main concerns. I think that's the way the major changes we made this week.
Awesome.
And after this is merged, there's another ticket about splitting up SOs and SOIs, and I was thinking of doing it after this is merged because it'd be easier to cover it after reshuffle things afterwards.
Yeah, I agree on that part. Like getting this piece, because this is a fairly large change. Getting this in first makes sense to me.
Okay, cool.
Was there anybody else that were able to take a look and wanted to talk about this?
I mean, I think, just like while Ware and I were kind of talking about it, it did feel like it's kind of this approach feels simple enough that it hopefully isn't going to be too controversial as far as how the data is going to get defined. But it seems pretty extensible, and it feels like starting again, kind of what Ware said, like starting with the burn rate alert is something that folks are all pretty familiar with. But then it seems like it's in a place where if we can agree on kind of this approach as it is with kind of the objects that are the kinds that kind of exist in this PR, it should be really easy to extend with additional sort of common core alerting styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we really want to emphasize with this is being able to extend it at other points, being able to add additional types of alerting, different alert conditions and things, and items like that. And I think to that point.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and to that point, I think this accomplishes like those goals.
Yeah, it feels like there will be such a variety of ways that folks are going to want to use SLO data to set up, some sort of notification system. So there are some that are really common, the stuff, that comes out of like the old SRE book and Alex's book. I think those will guide a lot of really common default instrumentation approaches for alerting. And then as long as we have it extensible enough that folks can add other support for other, new ways, new approaches that the folks come up with, I think it'll be easy to, not future-proof exactly, but keep it in an easily maintainable way.
Yeah. So yeah, if people want to maybe take a pass at this too, I think we're going to try and close this out soon, since it has been around for a little while. We want to move it along, but of course, giving it enough time to really bake, since this it is a fairly substantial change and a kind of foundational piece of to the spec.
Yeah, I think that Ware and I talked a little bit back and forth around the notification targets, and at this point, it's pretty simple. It's really just like having everything be in the metadata. If folks have stronger opinions on that, or like preferences or recommendations, I think that's it'd be cool to hear. I think it felt like, again, that was one of those things that felt so implementation specific that we kind of just wanted to leave it as open as we could.
I agree on that part, because depending on where these are getting implemented, there may be like internal targets that they use. So if there's already like a platform that has that, those targets may be in there, or you may have only certain targets that are supported. So yeah, I do agree that that's kind of a piece that we might want to leave out purposefully, to allow the flexibility to define those as needed within the implementation of the platform. Awesome. Cool. Well, moving along, actually, the next item, where did that go? Sorry, my thing went away. All right, so the next thing is the bad threshold proposal. I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring that up and I lost it. There we go. So this PR introduces the concept of a bad threshold, as opposed to like right now, currently the threshold metrics that we have assume good over total. This introduces a bad concept. So for SLIs that report on bad, a negative event, this allows to do that without having to do additional math overhead in your SLI. Where did you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, there was this ticket where someone asked if it was possible to define this like bad against total threshold instead of good total. And so I made this proposal to allow to define either bad or good against the total, and that's the main difference. And then it outlines how you could how it will be calculated, or make a suggestion how you could calculate it. And then it would always be like in this 0 to 1 range. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I commented about on this, and as just we might want to hint at the internal logic for how we do that math, as a suggestion, which would be the total and bad over total, or total minus bad over total.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Just-
if you go to the README file changes,
Yeah,
then online from line 296 or 290, it defines these things you asked for. There we
oh,
go.
perfect. Yep, there we go, cool. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think there's a number of different scenarios I think that this would help with. Like, you know, if you have errors or things like that, being able to tally those up. So I think this is a good addition.
Yeah, I'm like pretty split. I feel like in theory, I'd really like to push people towards good, just in that it's more of, to me, it's like more of that SLO standard, like defining what good is, rather than, there's so many ways something can be bad, and like trying to define in like an SLO definition or something, it's like an intractable problem. There's an infinite number of ways that something could be wrong. And so it feels like a little just shifted to me, like a mirror approach. But at the same time, like that's more like in theory, I'd like everyone to be defining good, but in practice, I've had this requested so many times when going through SLO setups. Like people have error metrics that they want to use, and they don't want to go out and instrument something brand new. So it feels like a stepping stone, like a pretty useful stepping stone for folks to get to that good definition. They can like get something started without necessarily having to be perfect in their definition of good early on.
Yeah, I guess we could add maybe like a paragraph, like that we strongly advise to use good and total instead of bad total, but that has been added as an alternative or something like, you know, those typical sentences you see sometimes where they advise you to do something and then you can ignore it if you want to.
Yeah, I guess I'd be kind of curious what folks feel about how much of opinion like that we should be giving in a spec like this. And similarly, like how that comes down to if it's like, if the opinion goes all the way through to like what's supported, that's probably too far. But
yeah, that's actually, I mean, that's an interesting topic, because I think in the observability tag in the CNCF meeting earlier this week, that was one of the kind of the things that came up with the white paper that the observability tag is creating, and like how much kind of best practices and whatnot are in there. And they were also giving examples of what the security tag is doing, where it's more of a FAQ or FAQ model that they're doing for best practices and suggestions. It may be something that we want to consider at some point. I think Mike, to what Mike, what you're talking about, like it might be something that we want to consider at some point. Like, how much do we put in the spec and how much do we pull out into a separate best practices guide?
yeah, I like that separation.
I think of it more of as a style guide in some sense, rather than a best practices guide. If the function is really a language, or the function that's being served is really a language function. And I suspect that two other lessons may be relevant here, which is that in my experience, there is no language in which you cannot write shitty things if you try hard enough. So I don't think that we should put more effort into constraining the expressiveness such that we are unable to write all of the things we might want to write, even if some of them are bad. In that sense, therefore, I would certainly support strongly opinionated meta recommendations, or strongly opinionated recommendations about how to construct these things. And quite honestly, most people are still figuring this out, so strongly written recommendations are likely to guide behavior quite a lot.
I like that. That's great.
So sorry, Niall, is that a vote for including some of those recommendations in somewhere in the OpenSLO project? Okay.
Yes.
Maybe that's something that where maybe I could try to work again with you on this this PR and help write up some of that recommendation.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'll add that as an action item here.
Now you've got so much experience in this space. Do you feel, just to make sure I'm not completely off base, do you feel like that interpretation of sort of good and bad metrics is something you've seen, or like has that been something that you would recommend that folks sort of drive towards good over using bad as a way to derive good from total?
I suppose the thing I'd say is for stuff like the internal push that Microsoft did for SLOs within Azure, very large number of teams involved, as you can imagine, and very much a distribution of how they initially conceived of the problem of doing SLOs for their services and what would be the most appropriate stuff. So basically, in the absence of other stuff, you're going to see diversity with a sufficiently large number of teams, which is more or less where my point is coming from. Specifically with reference to bad versus good, have I heard of teams kind of picking things that I wouldn't pick, including counting bad values and having that be an SLO driving alerting? Yes, sure. I'm inclined to say that ultimately we have to have a slightly hands-off view on this, though, right? So I think some of this will be made clearer with a couple of good examples. So maybe if we could find some across the community.
Yeah, I'd have to dig it up, but I know that like there's certain testing frameworks that I've worked with that report things as errors over the total runs. So not necessarily total passing. So you would have, so the signal that you're getting is that it would be the errors. So like if you were to try and do an SLO on that, you'd have to convert that in your SLI anyways.
I mean, testing methodology is a really interesting use case due to the fact that usually they have assertions, which is kind of that verification of good rather than reporting of bad, kind of in the assumption that if the test really fails, it'll crash and burn before it can tell you that something went wrong. So
right.
I also think the tool that Xavier, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but the slot tool, he uses an errors versus total approach when defined in his slot spec format, and not like OpenSLO. So that's like one example.
Yeah, I think that definitely chimes in well with kind of like having this functionality to enable folks to use SLOs how they see fit, and then potentially pairing that with a recommendation to say, like, if you're gonna, like, these paths have some risks, so it's kind of an assumption of some of that risk if you want to do this style.
So,
sorry.
I was just going to say, so when we're talking about making these recommendations, are we talking about something like, yes, you can use this to do X, but actually a better way of doing it would be Y, something like that? I'm just thinking about, so a lot of our customers are enterprise, financial, still running a lot of stuff on premise, have decided that OpenShift is the only way to run Kubernetes, don't really want to move to the cloud, that want to keep everything behind the firewall. And I'm just thinking how they'd react if I was to go to them and say, well, actually, you should be measuring the number of 200s that your API returns, not the number of 500s. They're going to sort of be turning around and going, but we need to know about the bad stuff. So I think if as part of this guidance, we can put something in there that says, yeah, sure, you can do that. But actually, this is the better way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think that maybe
we're aiming for.
Oh, sorry. I think that rhymes with kind of that call out for some good examples, so that folks can say, like, yes, reporting, like, it's not that monitoring 500 is bad. It's definitely a good thing to be able to monitor, but then being aware that they can get thrown from various locations, that they might not land in your data, maybe that is like a good example to showcase that 500 from your web application, it could get also returned from your load balancer. It could get returned from, your CDN could fail. Like any of those things that could potentially still affect the performance of the application might not show up in those metrics, which isn't to say, again, that they shouldn't track those. And as a starting spot, still really better than nothing, which maybe that's kind of, again, this like stepping stone aspect of this bad versus good. It can get folks there. And then as they discover those other, I don't want to say gaps per se, but like those other failure modes in their architecture, that's where they can start expanding things to do the good measurement.
Matthew, I think this is probably made a bit clearer if you think about some of the purposes for SLOs in the first place, which is describing the user experience. If you use SLOs to describe the positive user experience, naturally you focus on the total amount of goodness that the user experienced under various headings. If you focus on lowering the number of 500s, that is, of course, some relationship to the user experience, but if the user experience in the aggregate is very good, that's not captured necessarily by an SLO on the 500. So sometimes people get that kind of argument. I actually have to drop early for various reasons, folks. I'll say goodbye shortly, but Kit, you had some kind of commentary in Twitter go past about SLO repositories and automatic validation and stuff like that, and I just wanted to check in what you had in mind there.
Refresh my memory. Which Twitters are?
I'm sorry, I wasn't talking about your alt. I was talking about main.
My alt. Slow God, yeah. Pitch it at me again. What was the question?
I think, if I recall correctly, there was some thread between you and somebody else. It might have been at the bottom of an SRECon conversation, or might not. But basically,
okay,
you were talking about automatic validation, and maybe even Ian, you came in and said OSLO something or other, OSLO validate might be useful in this case, or somebody did anyway.
I don't know the specific tweet. I will say one of the use cases that I've been hearing about a lot from Noble 9 customers and other slow magicians out there in the market. One of the things we've been hearing a lot about is using something like OSLO, or in our platform we have a thing called SlowCuddle, but using the command line tools and CI/CD and GitHub repo scanning as a way of measuring the adoption rate of SLOs within the company. And so you can kind of think of, it's not just OSLO validate, but also presence checks and maybe even sending metrics to a central database of some sort that can tell you, okay, this repo has a slow YAML, it's been updated this recently, and yada, 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 those kinds of things. And then the second use case related to this that I've been hearing a lot about is kind of error budget verification. And so this is the scenario where you basically have a team that has exhausted error budget policy. Obviously, they can't be restricted from making any changes because they have reliability work to do. But they want some sort of check or audit that all of the work items and change lists, or all the change lists, are related to a work item that has been tagged as a reliability improvement and therefore okay, and to have some extra check on anything that would not be considered reliability improvement, whether it's tech debt pay down or whatever. High priority security fix, blah, 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 all the things that you would say, you can submit these even if it's code yellow. And so have that built into an either enforcement or audit or reporting of some sort, and kind of make that part of the CI/CD process. And these are things that, we could squint at it and say maybe it belongs in SlowCuddle, but I think it could be really powerful inside of OSLO. So maybe this is what you're talking about. Those are the use cases I think are most interesting. I know what other people think about them. What do you think, Niall?
Yeah. All right.
Oh, so Niall lobbed it out and then left. Okay, cool. Well, everybody else can talk about it then. What do you guys think about those use cases?
I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think one of the previous meetings, Andrew from GitLab showed their maturity model. So you can imagine you could use it for something similar too. So like check if maybe track if everything has an SOO. And what I personally was thinking of is like you have like this OpenTelemetry metrics API and schema definitions. And I was wondering if you somehow could validate either with all the metrics that are like defined or being used, if like the percentage of them that are being used, sorry, like you have them defined in OpenTelemetry schemas or like in code, and then you maybe could scan the code or maybe it's in the file, and then you could use the tool maybe to determine the percentage of SOs that cover all these metrics. So you can see like how much is something like that.
That feels so close to almost like a CI/CD based chaos engineering blocker that would basically allow like deploy an instance of your application and be able to evaluate your SLOs if the slow YAML was part of the repo itself, to be able to start fiddling with stuff and see like are the metrics actually affected when you introduce chaos or start failing requests for this application, and if they're not, then you've got some missing coverage on your SLOs, and maybe that's fine. Again, like similar like test coverage, like not everything necessarily needs an SLO, but you'll have a good understanding of like which changes introduced actually will affect SLOs versus which won't.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe it could be used like if you would be using OpenTelemetry, you could validate if like the metrics you are exposing, if like name mismatches, maybe you could pick things like that up. I was personally thinking about, but yeah, I think that's all great examples.
I think feel to be one of the tricky parts in that approach is a lot of the existing sort of like SLO definitions will have some like built into their query implementation might have artifacts that don't make sense to evaluate at the code level, or that would be hard to evaluate at the code level, right? Because they're going to be built into like the instance of Prometheus that's getting queried or something like that. So figuring out all those little details seems tricky, but would be incredibly useful, to be able to like have some automated SLO validation.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was going to say I really like that idea.
Could have like this monthly report that we get slapped around with, like, you still haven't defined any SLOs for your service you've been working on for the last 6 months. So, like, time to get your act together, or you won't be able to deploy any new versions anymore. Crazy stuff.
Yeah,
like
one of the things we had talked about early on is using OSLO to just do like a presence check for that SLO file, and I think to be able to do that, we just have to have an opinion about what the name or like what that file would be named, and we can do like just a simple presence check, so that like to what you're saying, like if a team hasn't defined that yet, it might throw an error, it might be a CI blocker.
Yeah, this sounds awesome. We used to go into clients, and one of the first things we do with their code base is run a code coverage check analysis across it, and then come back to them and say, okay, well, you've only got 25% of your code that's being tested, so let's look at that as a first step, shall we? Let's get the test in there. So to be able to do the same thing and say, well, actually, you've only got 5% of your infrastructure covered by an SLO, or something like that, that would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah.
In this scenario, I guess part of the implicit expectation there is that the SLO definitions are going to be coupled with the code that they're sort of connected with, like they're going to be coupled to the service per se, right?
Yeah,
I'm thinking of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in the same way that you keep your tests close to your code, you should keep your monitoring close to your code as well. In my view, anyway, it's
yeah.
It's something I've been banging on about for a while now, and I'm glad to have found people that are of a similar opinion.
I just, my mind immediately jumps to like weird edge cases, but I can imagine SLO implementations that are closer to the customer side, where you have most of your SLO definitions surrounding essentially like client side interactions that would cover like an end-to-end that might traverse a couple services in between, which isn't to say you shouldn't have SLOs for those services, because that front end still requires some level of reliable performance from those backend services. But yeah, maybe that's again like a good guidance. Maybe the fact that those aren't covered with SLOs would still be an indicator that your SLO evaluation is too high. It's like too high level, and you're not accounting for operational concerns lower in the stack.
Yeah, so I guess where my thoughts are going on this is that there was a tool, it may still be out there, called Cucumber Nagios back in the day. And what I used to do was I'd get the devs to write Cucumber tests, and they'd sit alongside the code, and they'd use them for their TDD and BDD and all the rest of it. And then when we came to deploy to production, we'd actually have Nagios running those checks every 10 minutes. And it would be, as a user, when I go to google.com and I search for chicken, it should return the Wikipedia page that's about chickens or something like that, right? And that worked really, really well. And because they were developing to those specs, if Nagios ran the spec and it failed, then we knew something had gone wrong somewhere in the deployment or whatever. And it kind of feels to me that if we were to take the SLO stuff and do something similar with it, then it could provide just as much value as those checks did 8, 9, 10 years ago, whenever it was I was doing it. So.
Yeah, I think it's quite common to have these checks running, like in Playwright or something similar. That would just run after deployment. Just check, do like a smoke test if everything is working. And sometimes even people have these checks running like on a scheduled level every day, just to make sure everything is still working as expected. And those could then also have like some metrics that get exported, like the number of successful checks. I've been thinking about making something for that at work, but first need to have test coverage a bit higher. So before that.
It's funny because I feel like those types of smoke tests, those production like synthetics essentially, are probably the closest things to, like, they're very similar to an SLO definition. It's really describing exactly what functionalities you expect to happen and kind of what the resulting outcome should be. So it does feel very, very similar.
You probably could link them somehow, and then you let the test run, and then you should expect that this SRO, the metrics that the SROs are based on, shouldn't have any errors. Basically, it should be 100% then, right? While you run the tests.
Yeah, it like almost makes me feel like there is some sort of tangential conversation to have with like the BDD frameworks out there that are basically doing the same thing and finding a way to, you know, standardize that lot, or possibly, I guess, convert sets of BDD tests directly into SLOs. But again, that like ends up coming back to like figuring out how to query for the metrics data and all that jazz. But the overall behavior is described in those specs. So.
As someone that really loves tests, that idea of being able to run tests on your SLOs really makes me happy in my core.
Well, and the other one is having an SLO on test reliability too. I think this is the other issue. Sometimes you have like flaky tests that you run them successively. They work, 99% of the time, but they don't always work, and then you get these test failures, and then you retry, and you don't know if the tests are flaky or if it's actually intermittent behavior or an underlying reliability issue, right? And so I think also getting more tests that can be run at different stages of the pipeline, right? Whether it's at before check-in, part of check-in, post check-in, integration, release, and then ongoing. in production, like all of those stages, being able to repurpose that test collateral across those, you know what I mean? And then seeing the monitoring SLOs and tests is kind of all one set of stuff that you manage.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually one of the use cases that I really like for SLOs and tests, especially like if you like looking at the test pyramid, like those end-to-end tests, like the Selenium based user tests. Those are going to be your flakiest and also the hardest to maintain. And so if you have an SLO on that, I think that would be your best metric to follow rather than just test failures, because there's been so much churn that I've experienced trying to maintain those when it's like, okay, there's a couple of them that are okay to have flaky, because that's the case. You'll rerun them, it'll be okay. But when do you actually dive in and need to fix them? Like that becomes the question, because there's a non-trivial lift most of the time.
But I do think they have the highest value. So if you if you have a low test coverage, it's probably the best ones to work on initially.
Yeah,
because it tests the user experience, and it tests like this stuff, and it does like some integration tests at the same time. So then at the same time, of course, you need to write your unit test, but I think it helps to increase your confidence that you can do a new release.
Yeah, most of the time you throw in some like retry logic to make sure that if something's not actually broke, but it's like it's that flakiness that when you actually need to dive into the code, like having the SLO for that to be able to say like, okay, I've exhausted my error budget, I'm just constantly rerunning these. Like we need to actually dive in and fix these versus like we can get by on just the retries.
It's kind of that weird. Oh, sorry.
You first, sorry.
I was gonna say it is that perfect like blurry boundary. It's that socio-technical boundary, right? Where like that technologically it's pretty good, and so you use humans to get from pretty good to like, yeah, I trust it. And so it's like that's where SLOs fit in so nicely, to just be able to say, we're gonna take something that's not inherently super reliable and put some math behind it until we can trust the reliability of it. And sometimes, historically that's retries. It's like 99% of the times it'll pass. So just run it a couple times and we'll be pretty sure, that single failure was a single failure. But then I guess that's kind of built into the SLO, just saying, oh, it's within our budget. Like it failed the appropriate number of times. And now it's just a CI/CD check.
Yeah.
Microsoft has written this nice library called Playwright, where you can test like in WebKit, like common browsers. That's not IE. And they have like this nice thing of flaky tests. You can like mark this as a flaky test, and then it will keep retrying it for an X amount of times, and then it can report, I think, even like which ones were flaky and which ones are not. So it's
there's a cool, I guess we're getting tangential, but like, there's a really cool library that I've used, Concept.js, that uses Playwright. And it also, it uses that retry logic. It's like, I love it. Like, and I've also found that library to be really easy to use and really ergonomic.
Yeah.
Hey, so there is another maybe unrelated topic, but the other area that we talked about at some point, and I don't know if any progress has been made, but I was on creating Hello World SLOs, Hello SLO stuff. Has anything happened with that, or any discussion on it?
Not yet. I think we made the chat. We actually do need to maybe take another look at it. I think the stumbling block that we're having is just how to ingest the OpenSLO format right now to a backend. We have a couple different options, but I think that's just what the first step is going to be, is how do we get that into an implementation.
I'm wondering if you could use something like Slot that already is able to support OpenSLO, so you can already generate like the Prometheus and alerting rules, and you could just make it a demo app with that as a and then you have different options. Maybe, I don't know, some other
Is there,
solutions.
sorry to interrupt. Is there a demo app that's common with Prometheus? Like, or, we had in Kubernetes, we had Guestbook. I don't know whatever happened to it, if people still use it, but something like that.
Oh, they
like
do.
a toy app that has Prometheus and then Sloth and then something like that. Minikube, running on Minikube or whatever, running on Docker Compose.
I'm going to put that as an action item for us to take a look at. I don't know of one off the top of my head. But I think that in their documents, the hello world that they have in there just pulls the metrics from your local machine, if I remember correctly, and puts that in. But I don't know if there's anything more extensive that would be kind of a better use case. But I'll put that as an action item to follow up on that.
I have got something that needs a lot of work. Basically, we were launch partners for AWS, and I needed a way to test their Prometheus and Grafana and X-ray combo thing. So I've got a very basic Flask app that basically, I think it returns sort of, it's fine apart from every 25th request or something like that. It's really, really basic. And on the 25th request, it will return a random error out of a 400 or 500. I can talk to Contino about whether they'd be happy for us to open source that.
Okay.
It is heavily biased towards Prometheus and X-ray, so it will need some tidying up around that. But it uses OpenTelemetry, and it uses and dumps back the Prometheus stats. So it could be something that we can look at.
Which language is it written in?
It's written in Python, I'm afraid. I'm a Python guy.
Okay.
Hey, no need to apologize.
It's the only.
We're Python friendly here.
Yeah, great. It's the only language out there where I can talk to an Arduino and do NumPy data crunching against massive data stats within 100 lines of code. So it's yeah. Never did get around to learning Node.js, but I think it's probably about time. 15
probably
years behind
healthier
everyone
for
else.
it.
I got my Go t-shirt.
Yeah. I'm also a big Node fan, so you're in good company.
Fair enough. But yeah, all right. Let me have a chat and see what I can do about potentially releasing that.
Honestly, what we should think about is, we can start with what we got, but at some point, if we create this hello slow repo, we could have examples for Python, examples for Go, examples for Ruby, examples for Node. This is something people, usually one of their higher order bits is what language they have affinity to. So, right, if they're trying to build SLOs, and so we're really building something that's agnostic to the programming language, right? It would be good to have examples in multiple languages.
Yeah,
but that's down the road. We got to start with just whatever we can hack together quickly and get out the door.
Yeah, I think makes sense.
So,
I think it will be beneficial if we finish off the current PRs. So then it would have like a potential, like a basic alerting and things like that. I think that would be a cool demo. That we will trigger an alert on SLO that is like breaching. But that's just.
I guess, and since we on that topic of the existing PRs, for the bad and the good sort of recommendation stuff, is that something that folks would prefer to have in the spec files themselves, or something on the wiki, on the GitHub wiki that's linked out to, or somewhere else entirely?
Yeah, maybe do we want to split up the PR? So do we want this PR that's currently there, is it fine? And then we raise a new PR for these best practices then? If it's not in the same,
Ian, do you feel like you have a preference for a paragraph's worth of text?
I'm trying to think. I mean, a paragraph worth of text, like in line in the spec.
Yeah, like it's to me, it's like it's a little tricky because it's a paragraph. It's like not. I don't imagine it to be a ton of text, but it's also not super specific to the spec itself. It's more like usage recommendations,
Yeah.
or to what Niall was saying, like style choice. So
Yeah.
it feels like a little. I could see it living in either place, but my inner like separate concerns says like put it somewhere that's more distinct to that type of dialogue.
I think I kind of like what the security tag did, where it's versioned. It's in like their repository. It's a separate folder, and then like a hierarchy of areas of concern. And that way, like you can version like the input, and take pull requests based on different, and like, approve them, have dialogue on them and things like that. So I think I like having it within the repo itself as files. And yeah, I think I think having it separate from the spec is also good, because then you are separate. Like I think this was kind of what Niall was talking about a little bit, about being able to have the spec as a pure technical implementation, as a pure technical piece, but then also having the additional strongly held best practices as a separate piece, but kind of complementary.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think yeah, I can work on figuring out a good spot to just put that into the existing repo as another MD file somewhere, and then we can figure out how to organize it. Cool. So then, yeah, to Ware's point, like we could plausibly just get the existing bad versus good PR merged, and then have a follow up that can describe the best practice stuff.
I think this one last topic is about separating SROs and SOI.
Yes, let me pull that up really quick. But yeah, did you want to talk about that?
I was just wondering what. I can see the benefits of splitting it up, because you could then reuse an SOI for different SROs. So if I have a web service or microservice that is based on a framework and has all the same metrics and all the same things, I can imagine you just specify like one SOI and then you point it to the different SROs, and then SRO is then on a per microservice. So I can see the benefits of to increase the reusability of the SOIs you define. I'm just wondering how you would link them together then. I had a quick look at how Kubernetes allows, if Kubernetes YAML files allow something like this, but they seem to just let you point to a file name, like a file path. Yeah, so that was the main query I had about this, how you would then refer to one another, to each other.
Yeah, I think I've got a very specific example of this with New Relic. They have this concept of an apdex that is essentially just 4 different measurements of the same latency value.
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely folks that want to convert that into more of an SLO friendly format.
I think GitLab is using apdexes in the SLO solution.
Yeah.
It's kind of an industry metric. I've seen it a few other places.
It's interesting that it's like, is it multiple? Is it like SLI reuse, or is it really just like multiple support for multiple thresholds or multiple targets?
This issue?
Yeah, are there scenarios where supporting multiple targets or thresholds wouldn't solve the reuse case? I mean, I guess that's part of like once you have multiple targets, it's essentially a new SLO anyways. But it
I think the use case that I think that like that this was around was like, you could have an SLO that you define, and then if like your implementation or like your data source changes, like let's say we move from, well, yeah, like New Relic to Datadog, it would just be the SLI that changes. You wouldn't have to rewrite the SLO. You might also, yeah, have multiple thresholds for that same SLI. So you would have like multiple SLOs that have different thresholds. It's just kind of decoupling the two, being able to say like, yeah, you know, like our SLO is separate from the SLI. One can change without having the other. So just kind of having that loose coupling within the spec.
That definitely appeals to the consultant in me. Being able to walk on site with a load of SLIs and SLOs ready to go for Datadog, New Relic, Cap Dynamics, whatever, and knowing that regardless of what the customer's using as their existing monitoring, we can dump this in. They'll have the SLOs there, and then as we wean them off their $4 billion a year proprietary monitoring system onto something that's probably better for half the money, you know, all it means is we just need to update the SLIs.
Yeah.
And the data continues to flow into the existing system, or into the new system rather, but with the same SLIs.
I can also imagine, like, I think a few meetings ago, there was this discussion about Captain. I can imagine, and if it would be separated, you could reuse the same SLI, like import it in Captain, and use the same one to define SLO of, and then do alerting things. So I think that would be also interesting.
Yeah.
So the only thing I had a question about, so if you would write these, if you want to rewrite these reusable SLIs, but if, for example, use Prometheus, you might want to have some labels that you want to query on. Like, for example, at my work, we have 8-10 like web services, and they all use the same metrics for like HTTP duration and things like that. But you want to query on like one specific service, so you have like service name is equal. So I can imagine that you then just want to somehow pass this some sort of parameter. So you would define like an SOL for service A and service B, but you want to reuse the same SOI, but you want maybe have access to the labels or annotations of the SOL. So you can like just like do this Go style template thing, then like how do you call them, bracket annotations, like just what the alert manager does when you want to access those. Does that make sense? Or because I lost my thought halfway through.
Yeah, sorry.
Like, to me, that almost feels like something that would be handled by the implementing like templating engine rather than by the spec. Like the queries are going to be so distinct per service, per observability platform, per your architecture. Like, it's going to be so unique for indicators. Like, it's hard for me to imagine being able to, I guess, to Matthew, to your point, like it's hard for me to imagine showing up with a bunch of SLIs because I don't know what their existing monitoring system queries like, what their query language is, what their architecture is, like how they've designed or named their environments or their services and all that jazz. And all of that is kind of embedded in the query right now.
Yeah.
So it feels like tricky to me to try to pull some of that embedding out into the indicator, if that makes sense.
But I want to throw. We're at time, so I just want to throw out one quick thing, and it's Matthew reminded me of something that we actually experienced a lot at Noble 9, and I think we kind of touched on it a little earlier. Is that if we're able to kind of break out like the SLOs and the SLIs, one of the things that that'll be helpful is having like that library of either like Hello World SLOs or just best practices SLOs, and because that's decoupled from the data source, is a little bit easier to share and be able to say like, okay, it's Prometheus, it's CloudWatch, whatever, we don't care. But this is how you can express that as an SLO. Bring your own data source. We might be able to even have some like SLIs, like boilerplate SLIs, but having that decoupled makes that kind of expression of this is what makes a good SLO a lot easier, because we don't have that kind of tied tightly together.
Yeah, I know Google has like a cookbook of SLOs that, like, depending on the type of service, it's like, oh, if you're a data pipeline, so you're going to want to do correctness and throughput and these kinds of things. And I guess in that scenario, it's almost like you're showing up with the set of templates that are SLOs, and all you have to do is swap out the SLI, if that makes it. Like, you basically only have to write the SLI part. The rest of it is kind of done for you, and then you can just fiddle with things after that. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood what you were saying about the, I think I was thinking about SLIs specifically, not the SLO template pattern.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And there are going to be common patterns, that we can do, and we can say, okay, well, Prometheus, the metric's probably going to be called this. Mm-hmm. But the point is that the SLO, I mean, I really like this idea of decoupling them and just being able to go, okay, yeah, great, here's the SLO. What's your backend provider? What are your metric names? Oh, great, here you go. That's the query already done. There's your SLO. It's turned up in the dashboard. Great, move on. So
because I can imagine that, like, the most common frameworks for Python, for example, like is Django. Yeah, Django is Python. You can imagine they have this plugin that either talks Prometheus or something like that, and then you could write a standard as well for those, and then you can just drop it in, like, to detect slow requests or things like that. Or maybe but if OpenTelemetry metrics has some pre-built instrumentation, you could write up SOIs definitions for those. It should be available for all the programming languages. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we're a couple minutes over. Did anybody have anything else they want to cover?
No. So that maybe repeat the action items.
So you and Mike are going to talk and add recommendations to the PR for. Well, this is a little bit related. Yeah, for the this was bad versus good. And then Matthew's going to look and see if he can open source that Hello World. And we're also going to try and start some better discovery on the OpenSLO end-to-end Hello World. Like how, probably using Sloth, since that's already set up and it's portable. And then Mike is going to add the recommendations in the OpenSLO repository.
Did we have any, did we want to keep letting the alerting PR bake, or are folks feeling pretty comfortable?
Maybe just a couple more days just to get some more feedback. And then, I think we will be good to merge.
Yeah, I think we asked people multiple times for feedback. So if they don't get feedback, it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah. And I do think that once we get in, we can iterate on it to as we learn more about its usage. I feel like that, like, the first time we actually try getting it set up end to end will be a great learning experience. So
I just realized a kind of a procedural thing. We should also, as we're adding this, we should version the spec, because we have this is a fairly substantial change, and so we should make sure to change to version that. So make a release.
But how do you want to do the releases then? Because it's not. Do you want to make releases for non-zero, non-major one?
Non-major ones. I think we probably will want to do that. I think we'll just take a look at. I mean, if it's a substantial actual change, we should probably do that.
Okay.
Like not just like copy changes.
Yeah, we don't have any existing releases, right?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so maybe this will be the first.
I will add
release.
that as an action item for myself.
Sweet.
I think there was also this ticket about adding a GitHub bot to Slack. So I don't know who was there.
Okay. I haven't seen that, or I don't remember that one.
It's like the newest ticket in news issue on the project.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Where am I? Here I am. Well, I'm just assigning myself that. All right. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
Matthew, it's good to meet you. Do you prefer?
Nice to meet you.
Do you prefer Matthew?
Either Matthews, either's fine. So, yeah, all good. And yeah, thanks for making me feel so welcome. And I'll see you online, and hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll be back on the call as well.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Awesome. Good
All
stuff.
right. Take
Cheers,
care,
folks.
all.
Thank you.
Bye.